All right, welcome back in. I'm Erin Trafford, CEO at Story Studio Network. Welcome to our YouTube channel, Podcast News. This is where you come to learn more about the world of branded podcasting, storytelling, and new media. And today I want to dig into a very specific part of branded podcasting that you probably already actually inherently know all of this, but we're going to dissect it. We're going to talk about the power of immersive storytelling and why this is the way advertising is moving. So in this video, we're going to break down the benefits of what we call immersive storytelling. And we're going to lay it over the traditional understanding of advertising so that if you're sitting there as a marketing manager, as a CMO, as a VP of comms, and you're trying to understand where to enhance your current advertising, marketing, and communications, you're going to start to get a better picture of how immersive storytelling makes everything better. Okay, so the first thing that we really need to do is give some definition to this, because immersive storytelling doesn't just have to be podcasting. It can also be an experience, an in-person event. It can be, to a certain extent, sitting in a movie theater can be considered an immersive experience, but I wouldn't say watching this YouTube video right now that you're having an immersive experience. However, if you are listening to me on the RSS feed while you're walking your dog, or you're doing the dishes, or maybe you are on the Peloton bike, then you might be having an immersive experience. This is what I'm trying to demonstrate to you, is that the immersion is defined by the listener or the audience. How deep they want to go with you is actually their choice. So creating the environment where they are able to go deep with you is really the challenge. And that's where the power of podcasting comes in. So let's just talk about where podcasting works. I mentioned walking the dog. I mentioned doing the dishes. I mentioned exercising. Those are the three places I tend to listen to podcasts most often. The other place I do it is in the car when I'm doing school pickup or drop off or running errands and so on and so forth. And there are actual studies that show that audio on demand, when it's consumed in that way, creates a more immersive experience and therefore a more solid emotional connection between the listener and the content than any other kind of content. It actually changes our brain chemistry so that we're able to have higher emotional retention and therefore brand retention. And then what you see is this beautiful thing happen called brand lift. And when those three things come together and they're experienced immersively by the listener, you have a champion for your brand or for your podcast. We talk a lot about champions at Story Studio Network, and that is the goal of your podcast, is to create champions. You want people who are going to come in and stick with you for the long haul. And so part of that is really understanding the power of what you're giving them, which is an opportunity to be immersed in your brand while also doing other things that are important to them. So immersive storytelling is best done when you are fully considerate of the audience and where they will be when they are receiving your content. So this is why it's not social media. This is why it's not Netflix and scroll, as we now say. We used to say at the beginning of the pandemic, Netflix and chill. Now it's Netflix and scroll, which is the marketer's worst nightmare. You don't want to have somebody thinking about two things at once. So podcasts allow for immersion. And this is where we see its true benefit over more traditional forms of advertising, which are more passive, which are less permission-based, and certainly they have not the same ability to pull at those emotional heartstrings. So how do we actually do it? And where does that power come from when we're thinking about how to craft our podcast? Well, there are three key elements to podcasts that enhance this whole immersion idea. The first one is the fact that podcasts can be long form. So it's the place where, yeah, you can put up your 15-second YouTube short or your 60-second Instagram video or even your 10-minute snippet on LinkedIn. But you can use all that content to drive folks to a 45-minute interview with an expert, interview with somebody who's going to dissect that and go further, immerse themselves in the content. And the beautiful part about it is, no, not everyone is going to click from your social media to your podcast feed. It's just not going to happen. But the people who do have made a choice to go deeper with you. So I've seen a stat out there by Podscribe, and they say that a podcast listener who has that behavior of going from social media to your podcast feed is actually worth 100 times more to your brand than a person who simply engages with you on social media. Now, I did ask them to explain where they got that stat, and they said it was an amalgam of a bunch of feedback that they got from their users and their listeners. But here's what I want you to know, is that stat doesn't feel wrong. Somebody who actively chooses to go and spend 45 minutes with you and your brand is an extremely valuable asset to you and your marketing. They are a champion. So the long form ability of podcasts is part of what gives it such power. The next thing is the technique. And I got to be honest, a lot of folks come to us and say they want an interview show or they want a talking head show. And I'll be the first one to tell you that is not as easy as it looks. A lot of folks, basically every podcaster can speak. Not every podcaster is able to use that format to hold the audience's attention. So what I'm really saying is that the format of your show matters. An interview show might feel easier to do, yes, but there's tons of coordination on the other side. There's a lot of moving parts to that most brands and marketers don't fully appreciate until they get into the nitty-gritty of doing an interview-based show. And it might not be the best way to immerse your desired target audience champion in your story, which is why at Story Studio Network, we run our clients through a process of determining, do you at any point in your storyboard for a season or whatever it may be, need to do a narrative? We learn and attach to emotion through story. And as much as we want it to be the case, interview shows typically fall flat at storytelling. We love the hero's journey. We love stories well told. And so if in your podcast plan, there is an opportunity, a budget and desire to do any form of narrative storytelling, you will be taking full advantage of the medium. I guarantee it. Now, does that require a whole different workflow? Yes. Does that require looking at your podcast through a totally different marketing lens? Absolutely. I would say it requires you to be very courageous and brave with how you want to show up in the market. But have we had the most success with our narrative style shows versus our interview style shows? Yeah. They're more successful because they create a more immersive environment for the listener. It's how our brains are wired to receive the content. Which brings me to the last thing, which is a very quick point about the power of immersive storytelling, is that your podcast does allow you to experience multisensory. So you can add in soundscapes. Our brains react to that. Sound effects, music, all of those things enhance the connective tissues. So I want you to think about, is your current marketing doing any of that right now for your audience? Are you creating that kind of immersive value for you, your brand, and your audience? Because if you're not, and I can say a vast majority of you probably are not, then you really should be considering how, not if, but how to enter the podcast market this year. Baby steps. Maybe start with an interview show. Get some really good research, market research, audience research. But consider the power of story and how it's being received. That's what we do best at Story Studio Network. So I invite all of your questions, all of your comments. Find me over on LinkedIn. I love the platform. I'm also pretty active on Instagram at its.Erin Trafford. And you can check out more details and resources from Story Studio Network, of course, in the caption or description box below. Thanks so much for checking out our channel. I'll see you in the next video.